Hey, it's Prspktv. Going to be making another video today on how I like to process my drums for liquid drum and bass. We're going to start from scratch. I'm going to go through some samples. Personally, I don't like to synthesize my own drums. I don't really see the point in that, nor do I have the time, nor do I even know how to. So yeah, what we're going to do is choose some classic breaks. That's my starting point really. Find a couple that like to complement each other and then layer them up with kicks and snares or rim shots, claps, blah blah blah, and then top loops. Okay, so here we are in Logic. This is my drum and bass production template, which I work from. I've been building this since pretty much day one. And so I found a break here, which we'll probably start with. It sounds pretty cool, sounds pretty funky, there's a lot to work with. I'm gonna just do a bit of a jump cut. I'm pretty much exclusively gonna stick to this folder, apart from the one shots, which I will layer up later. But for the breaks, I'm just gonna be working from this folder because it's free, because you can use it. And because I'm nice, I'll link it in the description below. I'm going to carry on layering these breaks to find out what works with each other, and I'll cut back to when I've got a couple of breaks in. So there are 5 break layers now. I'll play them all individually. So this would probably be the bulk of the breaks. This would be sort of like the focal point, the center point, and everything else would be working around that. Just right off the bat, what I want to do actually is change this one up. I don't want the vocal chant on every 4 bars. So what I'm going to do is just mangle that quickly. Okay. Sounds a little more groovy now. Now with this one, what I wanted to do was sort of take out the sort of upper mids to work around the main break. Let's introduce the main break. Let's see how that sounds together. Let's move on to the third one. Let's get rid of that bottom end, it's a little too boomy with that kick. It'll be an issue to mix later on. Kind of just want the hats on that one. Everyone loves a little Break 66 hat. Let's see how that works together. Let's bring that down a little bit. I think the second break as well. I'm going to bring that down too. Let's have a listen to the fourth one. Again, we're going to roll off that kick because we're going to layer it up with another kick. Let's listen to what we have so far. Let's brought that layer down just a smidge. This is the 5th break. There isn't too much low end on that, but let's just cut that out anyway. I don't want it to sound too thin, this one, I don't think. But there's a lot of sort of like boominess to it as well, so we want to make sure that's controlled. Let's mix this one in. All together, this is what we have so far. What's left is to find some kick and snare samples. So let me go through my folders. I like to use the Villem Mcleod sample packs, actually, which I picked up on through one of Mike Kiss's production live streams on Twitch. I kind of went through and just pretty much bought everything because they sound so good. But let me just go digging through here to see if we can find some kicks that sound like they would work with these breaks. What you're trying to do here is just hand pick and select elements that are going to work well together, and that's pretty much all I do with my drums. I just make sure they all work well together sonically. There isn't sort of like a science behind that. It's just you really have to rely on your ears and just trust what you're hearing. Now this kick 14 will probably work well. There's one of the upper layers. It doesn't have much weight to it, so I'm gonna go digging to find something that will happily sit underneath that. Let's just arrange that to complement the breaks to work in that kick snare pattern. It's quite a basic two-step, this one. There you go, sounded pretty fat. Let's try and find a snare. Right, I'm going to change packs now. I'm going to have a look in this Hit Kit Volume 3 sample pack. Shoutouts to Oris on recommending this one. That's a pretty decent rim shot, we can use that. There's actually quite a nasty resonance coming through on one of those breaks, which I need to deal with, but I'll deal with that soon. I reckon we could probably get a clap in there. Let's drop that in and match it up with our snare pattern. I don't really want any sub coming through on a clap, so I'm going to roll that low end off. You don't want to cut too much low off because you end up losing a lot of that thump. But you want to get off just about enough where it doesn't sound muddy. See, so if I go up to around 500, 600 hertz, it would start to sound a little too thin. I actually end up becoming really harsh and you get a massive build up of frequencies in that area, especially where we're working with classic breaks. So you want to compensate for that by not being too rough on the low cuts. Let's have a look at that rim shot. Again, there's a lot of like low end content on that. That sounds good. So a trick that I like to use is to mono the rim shot. We don't want that poking out on the sides too much, but then make the clap just a little wider. An imager will probably be alright. See how narrow that is? If we bump up the width and stereo wires. Might be a little too extreme, but it's really subtle, but it helps to get a little bit of separation in the two channels. This fourth break has a really nasty resonance coming through on that snare, so I'm just going to use the EQ to figure out what frequency that is and kill it. It's okay like that. Let's listen to what we got so far. It sounded pretty fat, sounded pretty full, also sounds quite messy, so we're going to need to fix that. Like I said with the other breaks, you don't want too much low end activity, because when you're layering your own kicks, you don't want all that mud coming through from the breaks, so you want to get rid of that almost entirely. You can leave the top end if you like it, if it really fits, but I just pretty much high pass all my breaks. I very rarely use the kicks from them, because I layer them so much. But yeah, I mean this kick isn't the weightiest of kicks, admittedly. Let's just have a look, see what's going on. In fact, there's a bit of a click at the end of the sample, so let's just add a bit of a fade out curve, smoothen that up a little bit. There's a bit of a resonance here, cut that out just a smidge. Now you don't have to be overly surgical with this. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is just get a really quick level on them to open up a little bit of headroom on the master. But yeah, there's a basic level. It doesn't sound too bad. I feel like we should probably get a subbier kick. Let's see what we can find. So what I've done here, because this second kick, which I'm going to name kick 2, it's got a lot more low end than the other one. I've cut the sub, or I've cut more of the sub off of this one. So then I like that sort of like upper, the mid range on that. I also like the low end and the top end of that kick drum. So together they sound like this. All together, it sounds like this now. Sounds pretty cool. Let's just take a look at break 1 for a second. because it's at this point you want to start deciding what's going to be the bulk of your break and then what's going to be in the stereo field to enhance the immersion, so to speak. So I'm just going to have a quick listen through to find out what has the potential to be on the sides and what should really be in the middle. If you noticed, I've actually put a chorus on some of the elements. Now this is sort of a bit of a, I mean, it's not a sort of, it is a bit of a secret weapon. I'm not quite sure what this chorus does, but it doesn't sound like any other chorus that I have. It actually cuts a lot of the top end off of the original sound, so let's just A-B between the two. You want to be paying attention to that high end and then how wide this thing makes drums sound. I use it a lot. It's good to not have it on every single drum layer, because then it would just sound like a phasey mess when you sum that down to mono. Just for some stereo separation, just to give things the illusion of being wider than they actually are. Hopefully you're watching this on headphones, you can hear that. But yeah, like I said, you don't want to be doing this to too many different elements. You want to keep things dead center. You want to also push certain things to the sides. So these two are the chorus layers, which I'll play for you now, and you get an idea of how wide you can make things. Together it's going to sound like this. It's sounding pretty good, but now I think what we should start focusing on doing is adding some movement to those breaks and then filling in the gaps with more layers. So it sounds well balanced, but it's quite flat. So let's get a little bit of a groove going on here. You can use a volume shaper if you like to do that, but just for the sake of the video and to keep things simple, most people know how to sidechain, so I'll be using that. I'm just going to quickly listen through and find what element I think would work well. Break 66 is always a good one to start pumping off of other elements. Sidechain that off of the kick, just give it a bit of a push. You can shape the curve with the attack and release. Obviously that's a bit of an extreme example, but if you start pulling that down, you get a lot of control over the groove and how quickly it comes back up. That sounds pretty cool already. I have a feeling this break 4 could benefit from some snare sidechain. I'll send that off. I'm not even using a snare, am I? Send that off to the clap. I want to get that pumping off the clap. See, it's already so much more groovy. It's just a very simple technique. This is without. This is with. I feel like the release is a little too long. It's already got so much more movement. It's so subtle. I think I'm going to bounce break 5 off of the clap as well, or the rim shot. Like I said, it's really subtle, but it's those subtle movements which add up to the bigger picture. I'm going to bounce this one off of the kick. Solo that. I see what that sounds like without the compressor. And then with. This is the main break as well, isn't it? This is one that we wanted to hold on to and preserve the most. And because of that, I'm not going to compress it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to clip it. Let's give it a little more bite. Let's listen to what that sounds like now. feel like there's just a little too much air coming in off of that, actually. So I use a transient master, the transient shaper. You can use Logic's enveloper. I went over that in the Lynn Collins Think Break video, if you want to go back to that to know exactly why and what we're doing here. So now you probably notice that we actually have some gaps where we've sidechained a lot of the breaks off of the kick and snares. So what we want to do is fill those gaps with some top layers. What we have now sounds great, but what we can do is make it sound even better. So what I'm going to do actually is go to my own samples and quickly just throw in like a shaker or something. This is a shaker that I made for my track Run to You. Let's have a listen now. It kind of fills in the gaps. It might be a little too bright actually. I might want to EQ that or pitch it down. I believe it's actually just the Collins tambourine shaker off of the Collins break, which again you can see in that Lynn Collins Think Break video. But yeah, I'm just going to EQ this and probably pitch it down a little bit because I think it's a little too sharp for what we have. Because it's sitting on the sides mostly, we could probably push that a little bit further with that super secret free TAL Chorus-LX. Just to push that out even further. I'm going to make sure you're gain matching everything as well, because your ears will fool you into thinking whatever's louder sounds better, so make sure you're always gain matching. Okay, let's listen to that in context. Pitch that up, it doesn't sound bright enough. It's not cutting through enough. That sounds full enough. Now what we can do is saturate the drum group. It's quite a huge part of my sound. The secret sauce is, sorry Josh, but Decapitator. Decapitator has a insanely good preset for fattening up your drum bus, and it's literally just called Drum Fattener 1. So let's listen to this again without the saturation from Decapitator. Let's turn the fattener on. Usually you have to drop the drive. I'm going to say that right off the bat before we go, oh shit, that doesn't sound too good. But yeah, you have to drop the drive. But this is just the preset on its own without any tweaking. I'm just going to drop that drive. We do have a little bit of tone shaping here, but really don't really want anything too bright or too sharp. But just for argument's sake, I'll bring the tone back up to unity. I'm going to push that drive up a little bit, just get a bit more bite. I usually find the sweet spot is just below 3 for this one. Now how fat does that sound in comparison to what we had before? I'm going to turn the Decapitator off now, and then pay attention to the metered volume, and then I'll switch it back on, and you tell me how much better that sounds. See? This is sort of the cherry on the cake. It sounded good before, but it sounds better with it. So that is pretty much the drum group done. Now what we can do from here is start parallel compressing, which is something that I already have set up with my template. That's what bus 2 is. So that's all going off to the drums para group. I know a lot of people like to parallel compress their kick and snares separately, but I feel like I'm not really ready to do that just now, because my workflow as it is, I feel I'm quite happy with it. But yeah, when it comes to parallel compressing and you're using big kick drums, you don't want too much of that kick to be coming through. You still want to process it with everything else so it all sounds cohesive, but you don't want too much of that boominess coming through to trigger the compressor. Because if you've got a really fat kick that's slamming the compressor, it's going to be really difficult to sort of like rein in any of those transients, or to sort of like shape and color any of the other transients, such as the snare or the hi-hats or whatever. So when it comes to parallel compressing, make sure you're not leaving too much low end in that bus. The potential for that kind of like pokiness and the transient pop you're going to be losing, because that kick drum is going to be slamming the compressor so hard that it's only really going to catch that transient. So anyway, let's just have a listen to that. I reckon that sounds probably okay. I like to use the SSLG compressor with the Pooch Drum Crush. I actually learnt this tip on, I think it was one of Pansando's Places videos on how he parallel compresses. He recommended the SSLG by Waves, that emulation, and then this preset specifically, which actually sounds really cool. You don't actually need to do much to it. Let's just give that a listen without first, and then with. And just in case you didn't know, the idea with parallel compression is to absolutely slam the living daylights out of that bus, to give it a lot of perceived volume. But then we're going to take that one step further and shape the sound, because we've got a lot of breaks that have a lot of natural air to them, where they've been recorded and sampled off of other tracks. You know, like you've got room reverbs, you've got a lot of background ambience in some cases. But with a parallel compression bus, it can get quite noisy. So that's where I use the enveloper. On the left hand side you've got the attack control, but realistically a good starting point is just to pull the release down a little bit so it sounds tighter. Now remember, this isn't going to be crazy high up in the mix, and this is going to be going straight to the stereo out. It's not going to be feeding back into the drum groups end. That's just how I like to work. I'm not sure if that's the correct way, but I feel like for me right now this is working quite well. Let's just see how much we need to remove from our parallel compression. We almost just want to isolate the transients on this. We don't want to, get rid of all of that room and all of that space entirely, but just to tame it just a tiny bit, so like around 30 to 40%, something like that. There's never really a set number. Use your ears, analyze what you're working with. Let's just give this a listen. I'm just going to boost the transients just a tiny bit, not too much, because you don't want it to be too pokey. Let's just A-B it without. With. I'll bring that down to 0. You want to effectively just mute that. Like I said, it's so subtle. It really is super subtle. But when it's not there, you know about it. The last thing left is to add a little bit of room, just to make it sound even more cohesive. So I've already got that set up in my template. I send the entire drum group to the room reverb, and then we kind of work from there. I like to use Valhalla Room. It's probably the best reverb plugin there is, in my opinion. After that, if you've noticed, I've rolled off the low end, because you don't want too much of that kick coming through, because it could just flood the low end and make it super muddy and super messy, so we don't want that. Let's just listen to how it sounds, and then I'll go through how I set my reverb up. There isn't really any particular formula that I use. I pretty much just change things until they sound good to me, and then use the faders or use a utility plugin to control where that sits in the mix, basically. See, if you pay attention to the low end, you can hear how much boominess there is now. We haven't EQ'd out the lows. all that's left to do is to mix that in. So let's drop it to 0. We'll start bringing it in gradually, and we'll find that sweet spot. Something else that I like to do is to push it out to the sides. Reverb is quite wide as it is, but we can make that a little bit wider by using another free plugin by Polyverse. Sounds pretty good. In fact, there's one thing that I forgot to do, and that's to set up a snare reverb. I've already got a send here going out to my snare reverb channel. Right, let's send those both out. I just like to use the chroma verb, actually. Logic stock chroma verb. It's really good. There's a really good reverb. I should probably use it more. In fact, I might not even necessarily need to use Valhalla Room. That's how good this reverb is. But I've just got into the habit of using the Valhalla stuff because they just sound incredible. But yeah, let's get onto the snare reverb to give the snares just a little more tail, a little more space. Another tip that I'd like to throw out there is when it comes to bussing stuff, ideally you want to EQ a lot of the body out of the effects send. Otherwise you could end up muddying things up. So just as an example, if you are doing, like a snare reverb, you don't want to leave the entire snare frequency in that bus, if that makes sense. You actually want to cut some of it off, usually the low end, so you get like a lot of bright top end shimmer. That's what I like to do anyway. I'm sure I'll end up changing that because I find that's probably wrong somehow, or Josh, one half of Siren, will tell me that I'm doing something wrong. But yeah, that's something that I like to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. That's sounding okay to me. I'm just going to mix that channel in now. And again, just like with the room reverb, I'm just going to push it out to the sides. Do that with a different plugin this time. I'm just going to use the TAL Chorus-LX again. That secret width weapon. So yeah, that's pretty much it. There's not really much else to talk about. That's pretty much all I do. Other than when it comes to mixing in full tracks, you have to bear in mind frequency limitations and getting things to sit well together. But for a basic drum track, this is pretty much all I do. In fact, there's one more thing that I'd like to talk about, and that is using a limiter instead of a compressor on your drum group. How limiters work, instead of squashing everything, they bring the quietest element up to the loudest element. That isn't the most scientific explanation, but that's what my ears are telling me is happening. Let's just go through that. I learned this from Goozy, actually, at the Education and Bass presentation at Clashmouth in 2019. Where I actually first met Josh and James, the two guys behind the Siren project. Big ups to you. Fucking so much love for you two. You guys are absolutely tearing it apart right now. Josh specifically, thank you for all the help that you've given me. Massive shout out to you, mate. You don't really want to be compressing too much. Drum and bass is a very loud and obnoxious genre, even for the liquid stuff. So limiting and clipping and distorting things, saturating things would probably be your best bet, which is why I think Goozy spoke about this limiting trick on the drum bus, just to bring everything together. So let's listen to it without, and then we'll dial in a small amount of limiting just to pull those quieter sections up to the louder sounds. Yeah, I think that snare verb was just a little bit too loud. But okay, let's get back to the limiting. I'm going to do is push the gain up. Now remember to gain match as well. And also when you use a limiter, you actually get a more consistent level. Drum and bass is very slammed, so to speak. Even some of the liquid stuff, you listen to Dormore, you listen to Edlin, you listen to Sator, everything sounds really pushed, but it's very controlled. There actually isn't too much compression going on from what I can hear. Nothing sounds too flat, everything's very loud, very prominent, but everything's controlled, and that's the main thing, and that's the trick that I think limiters have. That's a role limiters have to play in drum and bass production, that saturation and clipping. See how much more cohesive that sounds? But yeah, there you go, that's pretty much everything I do. We've gone through sound selection, we've gone through layering, very, very simple layering, but I like to rely on those classic breaks. And yeah, just really subtle changes that add up to a really cool, a really funky, a really groovy, a really thick sounding bigger picture. Let's just open span actually, just to have a quick look at what's happening and where it's happening. Well, sort of like the fundamentals of how I like to process my drums. Now, if I was to bounce it out, I could probably use that in a track. I hope this video has been insightful. Thanks, peace out.